This is part 2 in our video series describing football on 3. Please refer to part 1 for an introduction. But in part 2, we're going to take a look at the define feature of the app. And this is where you define your coaches, your players, your depth charts, your teams, your schedule, play calls, and drills. Okay, so for your coaches, it's pretty straightforward. You tap the coach button, you hit the plus to add a coach, and then once you tap a coach, the screen comes up where you can add additional information about the coach, including their name, their role, phone number, email, address, and any other information. Similarly, you can define your players by tapping the player button, hit the plus to add a new player, and then for each player you can add information about the player, again including the phone and email. So the emails are what's used for the email feature, and the phone numbers are what's used for the text feature. And I typically don't use all the fields, but they're there if you need them. The show rankings will be discussed more in part 4 for the player evaluations. And then show positions is a summary of all the positions that you currently have defined for this player in your depth charts. So here's an example of a player that's got too many positions, and you might want to go back and adjust your depth chart for that. Okay, so for the depth charts, you tap that and you see there's standard depth charts defined across the top. And for each of the depth charts, you would enter in the position name for the 11 positions. You can enter a subtype if you like. We use, for example, black, gold, and white subtypes for our first string, second string, third string. And then we also had some sub 1s, 2s, and 3s. For players that we might want to sub in at those positions. And then once you tap a grid, then it brings up all the players that you have defined, and then you can tap the player showing them at that position for that subtype. To remove the player, just tap the space. So you can define depth charts then for all these standard depth charts. And then if you want, you can create more depth charts by hitting that more button and then hitting the plus to get a new depth charts. And then you would just enter a name and a category. And each depth chart has to have a category because this is reused in the games portion of the app for scoring a game, keeping track of what players are in the game, etc. So you can select your category, and then again you can define your positions, you can define subtypes, and then you can select the players. Also, once you've created an additional depth chart, if you create a second additional depth chart, you also have the option then to copy values from the previously defined depth chart. Okay, every depth chart has to have a category assigned or you get an alert. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one. Okay, and then for teams, you go ahead and tap your teams. Define all the teams that you're playing, including your team. And so you'll give it a display name, and this typically should be an abbreviation because it shows up on the scoreboards in the games portion. You can have the full name of the team and the city or town, other information. And then you also indicate whether or not this is your team or not. So only one of these teams will be your team. And then where this comes into play is when you define your play calls. You can define play calls for your team and then all other opposing teams, just in case you want to have a different play call layout based on whether it's your team or not. Okay, and then once you have the teams defined, you can lay out your schedule for the season. Again, for a new game, just hitting the plus, and then it will Tapping on that game will bring up the other screen where you can tap to get a list of all the teams so that you can select both your visiting and home team, the date that they play, the field size. In case it's not a 100-yard field, you can choose from 60, 80, or 100. And then you can also indicate whether or not this is an exhibition game or not. Okay, again, if you're going to have a new game, then you need to assign certain information or you get an alert. So I'll go ahead and just delete this example that I created. All right, and then we'll go back and defining the play calls. So this is used during game playback, and you can define plays for various categories. And this is so that when you're in the middle of a game playback, you don't have to type out, all your play calls. You can predefine your play calls and then just select from a pull-down menu. And each play call is comprised of various components. So this is just an example where we might have a play call where the first part of the play call is the formation, followed by maybe a whole number. And then, the beauty of this is you can define your play calls the way you want them. And just to show you an example here, if we go into formation, once you can define the name for that component, and then you can hit the define values, and then here's all the values that I have defined for the formations. So again, this is just an example. You create it however you want it. And then the last part of the definition is drills. And this is also used in the practice portion of the app, which is described in part 5. But you can create various categories of drills. And then once you have a category, you tap that, you enter its name, and then you can define the drills for this particular category. So here's just a couple drills that I have defined in this category, and then you can give a short description or additional details. The short description is what shows up in the practice schedule if you want it to, and more about that in part 5. Okay, so that's it for part 2. Again, we hope you enjoy the app, and thanks for watching.